about climate change relations? Is it the Ministry of Foreign Affairs? Is it the Ministry of Economy, or is it the Ministry of Finance? Or is it another ministry? Does anybody want to take a guess? Finance? It's very close. It's very close. It's not finance, but it's very close. So I just yeah, for the sake of timing. So it's China's national. It's China's national. So the name is NDRC. So it's the National Development and Reform Commission of the People's Republic of China. So the NDRC is a ministerial level institution, and it actually devises China's development policy. And it's actually the leading negotiator, the chief negotiator in terms of the EU and China climate change relations. Actually, the Xie Zhenhua, the current chief negotiator for China, he's actually the director of NDRC, and so he has nothing to do with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which I found very interesting, because normally when you think about climate diplomacy, you always think about it's made in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but for China's case, it's the NDRC, so that's a leading institution, the leading actor, you could say. And then you have the Ministry of Ecology and Environment of the People's Republic of China, which is the MEE. And this ministry has merged a lot of previous ministries tackling climate change in terms of environment, water, and they merged together in 2018. And this ministry works closely with NDRC. They sent a delegation to the UNFCCC, and this is another leading actor in China's climate diplomacy. And another, like what I just said, the Ministry of Finance, the MOF, because it provides funding. So this is another very important actor in terms of China's climate diplomacy. And these three actors, they form a kind of a network, and they negotiate together with the EU. And of course, you have the DG Klima of the European Commission that is in the leading seat in terms of EU-China climate relations. And then you have DG Energy, because energy and climate intersects very, very, very well. And then you have the EEAS in terms of the EU, and then of course all those formal kind of negotiation agreements needs to be ratified by the European Parliament. So this is a kind of the central actors, I will call, in terms of EU-China and climate change relations. Well, of course, you have another kind of periphery of actors in terms of EU-China climate relations, where there are the civil society, there are business actors, there are academic institutions, there are think tanks who provide information, they provide advice and consultation to these central actors. So this is a kind of a network in terms of EU-China climate change diplomacy. But how do these networks interact, and how do they really actually negotiate relationships with each other and within each other? So then this is how I look into the actual diplomatic process of these actors' involvement in EU-China climate change relations. So when I was looking into this area of research, I deciphered, or another word is that I categorized a few milestones in terms of EU-China climate change relations, and especially ETS project. So the first is, the 2010, when is one of the first milestones into the EU-China climate change, because this is when the EU and China really actually started to think seriously about, collaborating. And then they released one of the most important joint statements, which is a joint statement on dialogue and cooperation on climate change between the EU and China, where they set a climate change hotline, the telephone line between the ministries, and they formalized these kind of negotiations at the political level. So this is the first milestones, and this is also when the EU-China ETS project came into inception. That China wanted the EU's know-how and practice to launch its own national ETS system. So this is 2010. And then a few years later, in 2014, the EU-China ETS emissions trading project formally commenced, and which was underpinned by a really strong political leadership at that time, because in 2013, the EU and China celebrated its 10-year of strategic partnership. So this provided political momentum into EU-China climate diplomacy. So this is when the EU-China EU-China ETS project really kind to, come into shape in many ways. And of course, within this timing, China's NDRC had extensive and intensive meetings and formal and informal meetings with DG Klima, DG DevCo, and also NDRC, was very much involved in these kind of high-level trainings between EU and Chinese stakeholders. And then in 2015, this is the third milestone where the EU and China celebrated its 40th anniversary of diplomatic relationship, and also, the Paris Agreement was signed at that time. So this is when there was a lot of development on both sides of the EU and China, but also where EU and China's climate relationship really had a lot of stimulus in it from the international level and also bilaterally. And at that time, another joint statement, EU-China joint statement on climate change was signed after the 17th bilateral summit between the EU and China. And they started to form a much more closer relationship at that time. So this is another major milestone. And then in 2017, the EU-China ETS project formally, actually this first project actually formally was completed, and it actually coincided with China's formal launch of its national ETS, and there was a lot of trainings between stakeholders between the EU and China, and there are lots of high-level policy meetings between each side, where the EU and China had this kind of came to see this EU-China ETS as a strategic kind of importance to advance their climate relationship, but also its overall EU-China climate relationship. And there was a lot of technical discussions during, from 2015 after the Paris Agreement signing to 2017, and because at the end it's all about sharing best practices and also how China can implement and develop its own national ETS. So this was 2017, but because this project was quite a success from a diplomacy and also a practical stance, in 2018, developments have developed into the EU and China launched a second ETS project, and also this kind of EU-China climate change relationship that was formalized in 2010 now is actually elevated to ministerial level. And so now they have a high level EU-China environment and climate change dialogue every year, I think. And I think they just had it last week, even despite of the distance, and it was held in hybrid format. And there was a lot of discussions about how the EU and China can advance, climate change relations amidst, geopolitical uncertainty and tensions as such. You can really see. So at least from my feeling is that EU-China relations has deteriorated, for various reasons, but you can see that the climate change dimension is that there's still a lot of progress going on, and I think this could provide an incentive to move forward this relationship, because climate change, touches upon everybody, and carbon doesn't have any passport, and we really need to tackle. And China is the biggest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions, and the EU has a lot of know-how and technology, and China really needs it. So I really do see this EU-China climate change relationship, and especially this flagship, what they tell officials term flagship of EU-China ETS project, as a kind of a beacon of hope for advancing good relationships. Yeah, so this is kind of a gist of what I put in the paper, and I didn't go into many details about the nitty-gritty of the negotiations, but if anybody is interested, please feel free to ask any questions and stuff. So yeah, thank you very much.
Many thanks. Big applause. I really enjoyed to see this optimistic approach to climate change for diplomacy and for improving the current relationship between China and the EU. It was a great pleasure to hear you, and now is the turn to read your interesting paper. Many thanks. Now is the turn of Dr. Cao Wei. Dr. Cao Wei is a research fellow at the Institute of European Studies of Chinese Academy of Social Science. She's also a guest research fellow of Global Think Tank in CAS. She was a visiting scholar of University of Freiburg, Center of European Policy Studies, European Council for Foreign Relations, and she gained her doctoral degree at the University of Catania with a full scholarship. She published monographies like European Union's climate change policy in the nexus between internal policy making and international negotiation in 2012. She has a big CV. She's really an expert, but to summarize her profile, she has published numerous papers in academic journals, such Journal on European Studies, Journal of Contemporary International Relations. Her researcher interests includes European foreign policy, EU-China relations, climate and energy governance, and Italian politics area. We have with us from Italy.
Thank you, Marta. Can you hear me?
Yes, maybe we adjust the volume.
Higher? How about now?
Now it seems to be better.
Better. Okay. Now, much better.
Much better, please.
Okay, good. All right. Thank you, Marta. My dear fellow, good morning and good afternoon to my colleagues in China. I'm privileged to be here where I'd like to share some understanding on low carbon development between the EU and China. My presentation will be included in 3 parts. And I would like to talk about the opportunity and the challenges between EU and China, and then will be the final remarks. The opportunities reflect on 3 aspects. First, I think there is a real timing between the EU and China right now. In September 2020, China and the EU established a green partnership. And I think the international community also reckon that the world cannot meet the climate goals and the energy transition without China's support. So coming to the second point, the global climate governance with Chinese characteristics has been increasingly recognized by the international communities, which is a concept of building a community with a shared future for mankind at its core. I think this is why it's not surprising that China has proposed a plan for the carbon peak in 2030 and the carbon neutrality in 2060 before. And the third point is China's capacity to participate in global climate governance has been greatly enhanced. We have incorporated the carbon target into our national strategy. We have already incorporate emission reduction into national economic development plans and accelerate the development of the carbon market and develop green finance. For example, since the 12th five-year plan, China has incorporated the reduction of carbon dioxide emission which is we call the carbon intensity per unit of GDP as an abiding target in the outline of the National Economic and the Social Development Plan. In 15th five-year plan, we set up the mandatory target of reduce the carbon dioxide emission per unit of GDP by 18% at the level of by the year of 2025. Regarding to the carbon market, as Mrs. Xia said before, since February 1st, 2021, last year, the ETS in China has officially implemented nationally, provide institutional tools in line with international standards to achieve the goal of carbon, to the goal of the climate target. This is actually being great helped by the EU since the year of 20, I guess. I mean, it's been a 20 years efforts between the EU and China concerning to the China's ETS. For the green finance, China has outstanding green loans in both domestic and foreign currencies, had reached out about 12 trillion yuan in 2020, ranking first in the world. The stock of green bonds is about 800 billion yuan, which is the second largest in the world. But also, there have several challenges between EU and China in low carbon field that we have to face. I think geopoliticals making EU-China low carbon cooperation more difficult than ever. Since taking the office, Ms. van der Leyen has led the European Commission labeled itself as a geopolitical council. In the Europe Green Deal, the EU described green digital transformation as a necessary path for the coalition of democracy to address global issues, including climate governance. This point out that the global climate governance being labeled as a politics. I mean, as a geopolitics. During the Trump administration, friction between China and the US has intensified, and most EU member states have chosen sides and transformed sensitive political issues to the alien levels, making the European Commission more geopolitical. And the outbreak of the COVID-19 has caused the EU to highly politicalized issue, such as narrative and human rights, weaken the rational and the cooperative side of the global climate governance. I mean, the global governance in the whole, and seriously damage the political mutual trust between EU and China. Under the garden of the concept of strategic autonomy, the EU's pursuit of global leadership has further intensified the competition between EU and China in low carbon area. The EU has taken global climate and energy governance to a high strategic level by speeding up its internal legislative process and international negotiations to advance the international political agenda. Nord Stream 2 is the case in this point. Geopolitics and the great power competition, as well as division within the EU, and a strong focus on the climate agenda has driven the EU towards a strategic approach. In the end, the EU is shaping a highly geopolitical climate ground strategy from inside out, from technology to trade. For China, the fragmentation of the global climate governance and the complexity of the low carbon development are bound to further divide the camp of developing countries. The principle of common but differentiated responsibilities under the UNFCCC framework is being abandoned by the EU and the developing country. The competition among major powers in models, resources, trade, capital, and technology is intensifying. Developed countries represented by the EU and the US continue to develop their global governance model in the direction of legally binding, non-discriminatory, and market-oriented model. From the Kyoto Protocol, Bali Roadmap, Copenhagen Agreement, Paris Agreement, and Codeway's implementation rules developed by the countries represented by the EU have gradually abandoned the principle of CBDR and moved closer to the group of countries represented by the US. Market-based carbon price, carbon border coordination mechanism, which is I call it the carbon tariff, and other trade tools are becoming developed countries' main tool to tackle climate change and prevent the risk of so-called carbon leakage. The EU's triple positioning towards China has comprehensively enhanced its competition and confrontation with China. In 2019, the EU redefined China as a negotiating and economic partner, a competitor, and an institutional rival. ASEAN used a new era of competition and cooperation in EU-China relations. Compared with the past, EU-China relations face more uncertainties and the new circumstances. Coupled with the US comprehensive continent stance against China, the EU and the US are working together to abstract China's participating in global climate governance in an accelerating manner, meaning both in tools and ideological side. In terms of institution, the EU has made low carbon development a core strategic priority. For example, the European Green Deal has become a governance platform for the Commission and a guide for the development of the EU's in the future. And also, I think the EU has used this the advanced EU ETS and they are the way of to managing to develop the climate governance to also comprehensively through the bilateral and the multilateral mechanism. The EU spread its law and regulation to the outside world. For example, the international organizations, the International Aviation Organizations, and the International Maritime Associations. And I think they have adopted the EU's climate ideas. For the conclusion marks, I think China and the EU have adopted different paths and models on emission reductions and decarbonization. These differences is mainly due to the two sides are in different stage of historical development, as well as different political system and other factors. In terms of the model, the EU is gradually abandoning the principle of CBDR under the UNFCCC, insists polluter pays idea, tooled by the EU ETS and the CBAM. The EU is accelerating the pace of low carbon transition and net zero emissions from home to abroad. For China, achieving the carbon neutrality goal has caused a broad and profound economic and social system change. To reach carbon neutral, China probably will take 30 years to achieve what developing countries might need 45 or even 70 years to achieve. It is clear that finding an equitable low carbon development is a long-term hard task. EU-China cooperation on this field will certainly contribute to the overall effects of the global climate governance and green transformation. Despite many noises and obstacles, cooperation between EU and China should yield more benefits than confrontation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Many thanks. Many thanks. Very interesting presentation. It's good to hear words like cooperations and compromises with developing countries. Now I'm very pleased to introduce our last, last speaker, but very important and expert professor. It's a pleasure to have you here, Professor Lei Rao. She's a professor at the School of Economics. She won university in China. She's also Jean Monnet Chair and expert in different fields like world economy, EU studies, specializing precisely in European Union climate policy. She has led very numerous projects implementing in European studies with Erasmus, Jean Monnet research projects like EU Erasmus Jean Monnet Chair as chairholder in 2014 until 2017, and different interesting topics on her research. She will speak us about this kind of climate change issues around the title "Study on China's Endeavors to Transfer from Conventional Energy to Low Carbon Energy." Many thanks, and now the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So I want to share my PPT with you, and can you see that?
Perfect.
Can you see my PPT?
Perfect.
Yes?
Yes.
Perfect. Oh, that's good. Okay. Let me start. Good afternoon and good morning. That depends on where you are. What I will talk about today, that's about China's endeavor to transfer from conventional energy to low carbon energy. According to Global Energy Review, last year, that's in 2021, the total carbon dioxide emission of the world, that's about 36.3 billion tons. And among that, China contribute about 1/3 of it. That's 11.9 billion. That's a big sum, okay? And if we study of China's emission, we may find that the consumption of our conventional energy, I have to remove it a bit, sorry. The consumption of the conventional energy contribute 93% of China's emission. So we may say that the main carbon source of China that comes from our conventional energy consumption. And in China, from 2020 on, we have the 2 carbon targets First one is the 2030 target. That means we have to peak the carbon emission by 2030. And the second one is by around 2060, we will achieve carbon neutrality. So that's the very well-known carbon target for China. However, we have to come across the problem that nowadays we have such a big sum of emission. And in 38 years, we only have 38 years, and we have to bring it down to net zero. The emission should be net zero. So that's really a very hard work. And we have to do a lot of work on our energy activities, because energy consumption contribute most of the emission of China. As for our energy consumption, I have to say it increases together with our economic growth. Maybe you know that from 1978, China adopted the open door policy, and we have economic growth from then on. That means our GDP increased dramatically. So here, the blue one shows the increase of our GDP. However, accompanied with the increase of our GDP, the energy consumption, which is shown by the orange ones, you see our energy consumption also increase. Even the increasing of energy consumption is much, much quicker than the increase of GDP. Yeah, that's at the beginning of our economic growth in 1970s. And among the energy, I have to point out one thing, that's the proportion of our coal consumption. That's quite a lot. This line shows the proportion of coal. We can say that in 1990s, to the toppest point here, that means the proportion of coal in energy consumption reaches 76%. So we consume a lot of coal, and everybody knows that coal gives a lot of emission, much more than oil and other things. Luckily enough, as we come to the new century, we find that the situation changed, right? And we can see our GDP increase, the blue ones. However, our energy consumption increase much slower, especially in the recent 10 years, okay? So that shows our economic growth decoupled from the energy consumption increasing. And we may also say our economic growth decoupled from the carbon emission, right? And we may also say our carbon intensity decrease. And for this line, it shows the proportion of coal in the energy consumption. It goes down, in 2021, it goes down to about 56%. So we have 20% down compared with that in 1990s. As coal, the consumption of coal goes down, the emission goes down. Why we try to do a lot to decrease the coal consumption? Because we want to decrease the carbon intensity. And China promised in 2009 that we will reduce the carbon intensity around 40% to 45% by 2020. And we achieved that. In 2018, we reduced our carbon intensity by 45.8%, okay? And also at Paris Agreement China's INDC, that's the intended national determined contribution, says that we will cut the carbon intensity. That means the emission per unit of GDP. We will cut that by 60% to 65%. And we will try our best to do the 65%. And I think we could do that. So that's for the decrease of carbon intensity. I would like to show you the data by PricewaterhouseCoopers about the decrease of carbon intensity in the world. And China, in this year, China is top 1, and next year, top 2, and next year, top 1 again. So within the following years, China all tried to decrease the carbon intensity above the average level of the world. Okay, so how could we do that? A very important measure for us, that's to adjust the energy structure and decrease the proportion of coal in the total consumption of energy. However, till now, coal still consists 56% of our whole energy consumption, because in China, we are rich in coal and we lack oil and natural gas. And in China, our economic development also depends a lot on the consumption of energy. So in 2021, China's total consumption of energy, that's a quite big number still. However, we are trying to have more clean energy. For example, our electricity power generation in last year, we increased the clean energy electricity to 25.5%. And we will also try to increase more. For example, by our 14th 5-year plan, we got this 5-year plan. Every 5 years, we will have a plan. And so for this 14th 5-year plan, it covers from 2021 to 2025. That means by the end of 2025, our proportion of clean energy electricity would reach 39%. So we are increasing the clean energy consumption. However, nowadays, we still have a big sum of energy consumption, okay? Some people may say, why not China increase more of the carbon sinks so as to absorb so much emission? Carbon sinks might be helpful. However, carbon sinks are quite limited. In 2021, the total carbon sinks in China, that's around 1.11 billion tons, roughly. But our emission is much, much more than that. Even we double or triple the carbon sinks, that cannot, you say, absorb so much emission. So what we have to do, we should focus on energy, transfer to no carbon energy. That's the way. So I think that there will be 2 important ways for us to do. The first one is to have clean use of our conventional energy. The second one, that's to increase the clean and renewable energy. As for the clean use of conventional energy, for example, in our country, we have the project to turn from coal consumption to electricity consumption for household, for the firms, and so on. Especially in the north part of China, in winter, they demand a lot of coal for heating. So about 10 years ago, we started the project to turn from coal to electricity. So electricity could be clean. Of course, when we want to use electricity, we also need coal to produce electricity. So for the coal-fired power plants, we need to have a more efficient use of the coals to produce electricity. So let coals to be more clean. We have the technology to do that. And as we use coal, even we have the coal washed to be more clean, there's still emission. So we need to have CCS, carbon capture and storage, this method to have the end treatment to eliminate the emission. So for CCS, China added a U inside it. So we have the CCUS. So carbon capture, utilization, and storage. We make use of the carbon dioxide captured. There could be some examples for our coal-fired power plants. They try to have more efficient and clean use of the coal, and they use their coal, the coal washing technology. We may also call it as clean coal technology. With this knowledge, they not only have the coal desulfurization, but also have the coal decarbonization. So the coal become more clean and the emission goes down, with less emission. However, still some emission, right? So CCUS technology used for end treatment. Till now in China, we have around 40 CCUS projects for coal-fired power plant. Energy China, that is a big company, a state-owned company. It had some demonstration project with CCUS technology. Jinjian power plant, that's one of their project, okay, one of their demonstration project. This plant is in operation now, and with an annual capacity, capture capacity of 150,000 tons. Till now, it's the biggest one in China. Over 90% of the carbon dioxide captured. And we use the captured carbon dioxide for carbon dioxide drive. Simply, we call it oil drive. That's a method to enhance oil production. So we use the captured carbon dioxide. And now also, that's the Energy China, they are building another big CCUS project at Gansu province. This project will be finished at the end of next year. So just 1 year later, it will almost finish it. And nowadays in our world, we already have 2 CCS projects, over 1 million tons of capture capacity. One is in America, another one is in Canada, and now Energy China is building the 3rd one with the capture capacity of 1.5 million tons. As it is finished, it will be the largest one in the world. And they also build a pipeline transportation for this project. Because when we for the transportation pipeline, will lower down the cost. Of course, it demands the large scale Yes, so this 1.5 million ton capture capacity will be okay for this pipeline transportation. So all of their captured carbon dioxide will be used for oil drive or for storage. And over 90% of their emission will be captured. The purity of their finished product, that means the captured carbon dioxide, will be 99.5%, almost pure. And all will be used for oil drive or storage. Okay. So in addition to the clean usage of the conventional energy, China also try hard to increase the consumption of clean and renewable energy. For renewable energy, we mainly have hydropower, wind power, solar power in China. And for the others, that be quite minor, okay? For hydropower, that's most important one in China, especially in my province, Sichuan province. 80% of our electricity provided by our hydropower, okay, in my province. In China, we also try to increase the consumption of clean energy. We regard natural gas as clean energy. Of course, natural gas may have emission, yes. However, the emission of natural gas is much lower than other conventional energy, especially much lower than coal. Nuclear power, that's also clean energy, and other renewable energy, they are all belong to clean energy. That's what we want to increase the consumption, especially after 2005, because in that year we have the renewable energy law, and this law encourages various ownership entities to participate in the market of renewable energy. And we also had the overall goals. For example, we have the goal for making the renewable energy consumption ratio up to 10% by 2010 and 15% by 2020. But for this one, I think in 2020, we just reached a little bit more than 14%, not 15% yet. However, we're trying to do more, to have more. And also we may increase the non-fossil energy consumption. For example, we have the goal to increase the consumption of non-fossil energy, and by 2030, increase to 20%. So all these efforts shows that we want to increase the proportion of clean energy in China. This shows from 2017 to 2020, the clean energy proportion increase in China. And to the end of 2025, it will be increased to 39%. Yeah. So in China, we have put great effort on the energy activities. Not only the energy activities, we also have some other carbon reduction measures as our national ETS, which started last year. But here, I won't talk too much about the ETS. And just now, Dr. Chao Hui and Dr. Xia, they have introduced you something about our national ETS. So whatever our energy activity and the carbon reduction measures, all we do, that's for the target, to achieve the target of peaking the emission by 2030 and achieve the carbon neutrality by 2060. Okay, I just finished my talk, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this interesting presentation. Big challenges, big efforts. It was very interesting to show all the data you mentioned. Now we have 10 minutes for questions and answers. Please, the floor is yours.
I'm not sure which of you can best answer this. So the EU has an ETS and trades emissions permits, and so does China. I realize that the two systems are not designed in exactly the same way. So, permits can't be traded directly across. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is because of the CBAM. So a carbon tax should be applying a tax on products in which the emissions haven't already paid a carbon tax of some sort, or where the carbon hasn't been paid for in another system. But in China, there is an ETS system. So what I'm wondering about is, what exactly is the problem? Should it not be possible to create a CBAM that recognizes China's ETS and that therefore counts Chinese products as having already the emissions factored in? What exactly is the problem here? Is it an issue of compatibility, or is it an issue of coverage, that certain products aren't covered by, for example, the Chinese ETS? I mean, why does that not work?
It's a difficult question.
I always get this question when I with CBAM, and I'm actually working on this CBAM project, and another policy paper is going to be published in October. So feel free to go on the GRI LSE website, and because we're writing on CBAM at the moment, it's such a hot topic. What I can say is really, I think it's more of a political issue, and also. But looking to the long term, I mean, now currently people are talking about CBAM and carbon pricing, which is a market-based instrument to tackle climate change. I think in the future, I think what I've been reliably informed from officials is that the EU and China are really looking into linking the ETS in the future, maybe in 20 or 30 years. Sorry. Yeah, the link their ETS in 20 or 30 years, but there's a lot of problems going on, and there are lots of technical issues which is beyond my expertise. But I think carbon pricing is a way forward for China and for the EU, and there's lots that China needs to learn from the EU ETS, and the EU also has a lot of mistakes in their design and implementation of the ETS. So that's my take at the moment.
Would you like to add something, Professor Raulei or Cao Hui, on this question, CBAM, how to certificate the products from China, clean products, or the effort?
Well, am I allowed to answer the question?
Yes, please.
All right. I wrote an academic paper this last year. On the Journal of European Studies. It's really about the EU's CBAM. I think I agree with Mr. Richard McMahon. Really, what's going on between the EU and China, and in terms of CBAM? If we have a national ETS and the EU have an ETS, what's the point to make the carbon price on the imports mainly from China? I think I agree with Ms. Xia. Right now, I think the European Commission having the CBAM is mainly focused on the political. But For the practical point, I think the core issue about the CBAM is it's because of the carbon leakage concern. As I told before, the carbon leakage is very dodgy. This regarding to this ETS, we have a different model, a different standard, and a different price. So how to recognize the two systems in the mutual recognized way? If we are solved this problem, maybe we will have to have these two systems be linked, and the CBAM probably will be banned one day. Thank you.
Are you happy with the answers?
I don't know. Yes, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. I am asking here, Richard. I think that's fine. It's a good explanation. Thank you very much. Now,
thanks.
Other question, Professor Traversa?
Like this, okay. Thank you very much for the speeches. I was wondering what were the reasons why the Chinese government wanted to keep increasing carbon emission until 2030. Because from what I saw, there is a lot of ambition after that time, but from between now and 2030, carbon emission will increase, and they are increasing from what I see from the data. They've been increasing quite a lot in the last years in comparison to other parts of the world. So I was wondering whether there were internal reasons, some regions that were more dependent on coal, like we have in Europe. In Europe, we have Poland, for example, which is heavily dependent on coal, and therefore in the negotiation we had to adapt. But that did not, despite the fact that there were special regimes introduced for some states, the objective was still quite ambitious and immediate. So I would like to know why there is this 8 years gap, which is for the world is not so good.
Thank you, Professor Traversa. May I ask Professor Raoli to try to answer, because we saw on your presentation those time and challenges.
Yeah.
Thank
you. Yes, thank you. Why China has such a big ambition to peak the carbon emission by 2030? This is a question. In fact, I know that in Europe, you have the 2050 climate neutrality. That is quite ambitious, I think. Yes, and in some European countries, you said you will get rid of coal, okay, so as to decrease the emission. Of course, just several days ago, Germany decided that maybe they will delay that and won't give up the coal power electricity around 2035, I think. However, I think it is a trend to lower down the emission. And we have to say that it's true. China had 1/3 of the world's emission. We should be responsible for the global governance of climate change, and we want to do something for the work to decrease the emission. That's right. And in China, we tried hard to do that. And as for just now, it said, why when we have to depend on the coal, why we made such an ambitious goal? It's true, we have to depend on our coal, but gradually you may find we have some technologies to reduce the emission caused by the coals. We will go on, we won't, like some European countries say, we will get rid of coal soon, okay, within a couple of decades. We could hardly do that very recently. However, we try to have some innovations in our technologies. Yes, we clean our coal to have less emission. And then we try to have more CCUS technology to capture 90% of the emission. That's the way for us to help us. So we intend to peak the carbon emission around 2030, okay? So that's why we have that. We also did some work to say, okay, we have the ability to do that. That won't be too much beyond what we can do. So that's why we do that. And nowadays in China, everywhere, in every province, every city, people are working hard for that. And I think that we will do. You may see that the decoupling of our economic growth and the carbon emission. From that, you can see it's the decoupling becomes more and more. So it is. So I believe it is ambitious. However, it's beyond our. It's not beyond our ability. It's we can reach that. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are respecting the time now. This panel is ended, and we have a break until 11:15 to go to the next panel, competition policy, governance, and the digital area. Many thanks for our guest speakers. It was a great pleasure to having you here at our university, and we have learned a lot on hearing your speech. Many thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Panel of our international conference, which will be devoted to competition and governance of competition within the digital era. We have three big experts in competition policy and also the impact as well on of the digital era in this policy and the global governance of competition in general. We have European perspectives, we will have Chinese perspectives. The three experts are, well, we will start with Lazar Radic. Lazar had a experience as a lawyer at the beginning, and then he decided to move to the academic world. He prepared a PhD at the European University Institute, precisely on competition, also including some philosophical issues. And he's now working for an American think tank, ICLEI, which is very much on analysis, economic analysis of law. And he has been working a lot on the Digital Markets Act and comparing it as well with US regulations. On the other hand, we have Sandra Marco. Sandra is a very well-known competition law expert. She was professor at Glasgow University, and then she moved to Hong Kong, to the Chinese University of Hong Kong, where she is teaching. She has been there for a long period now. So she knows very well not only European competition law and general the trends at global level, but also has the experience in China to this panel. And finally, we have Miguel Verdaguer, who is a professor of competition law and EU law here at CEU San Pablo University. We recently co-authored a paper on precisely global governance of competition policy and the cooperation between EU and China in this field. So these are the three experts, and the way we have organized the panel is we will be launching some questions to the speakers, 3 questions for each of the speakers. They will be answering it then, but then the other members of the panel can comment if they want on any of the issues that any of the answers to those questions. So we are starting with Lazar Radik. And the first question, Lazar, is how do you think the Digital Markets Act will interact with EU competition law? And are there likely to be any overlaps between both of them?
Yeah. So I think the DMA itself recognizes, the likelihood of overlaps. So for instance, it warns NCAs not to issue competition law decisions that conflict with obligations under the DMA, which suggests that it is keenly aware of that possibility. It also indicates, for example, in Article 19, that the Commission may take into account any relevant findings pursuant to proceedings under Article 101 or 102, which are the, so to speak, the spine of EU competition law. The problem of all of this is, of course, the possibility of double or even triple jeopardy, that, basically in practice, the same behavior will be subject to the DMA national competition law and EU competition law. Now, I have a segment in my presentation about the potential conflicts between EU competition law and the DMA. So I don't want to get into spoilers too much, but I will mention, for example, that both the DMA and EU competition law cover similar conduct, but in different ways. So certain behavior that wouldn't be considered anti-competitive or harmful for the consumer under EU competition law is prohibited under the DMA, such as the refusal to interoperate, which is only under certain circumstances prohibited, such as under Article 102, under the Essential Facilities Doctrine. So what I think that the upshot will be is that the interaction between the DMA and competition law and the overlaps between them will change how the companies that are targeted compete in the market. I will tell you more during the presentation, I think.
Okay, so if you want to, we can move then to this second question. And anyone would like to comment on your first statements.
Yeah.
About examples of those unintended consequences that you mentioned the DMA might have.
Yeah. So I think that one risk with sort of far-reaching regulatory regimes or systems, especially that deploy in fast-moving markets, such as in digital, is the possibility of unintended consequences, sometimes opposed to what regulation has as its stated goal. So, for example, some that I can think of is the possibility of security breaches. So by interoperating with other app stores or third-party apps, or by allowing sideloading, for example, an operating system such as the iOS or Apple's iOS I think will almost certainly be exposed to more security breaches because it, in a sense, relinquishes that ability to curate the content and to filter the content that gets into its operating system. Another unintended consequence is, for instance, the DMA mandates interoperability of data between messaging services, such as WhatsApp and, I don't know, Viber, whatnot, Telegram, and so on. One issue that I see with this logically is why download an up and coming app if I can already reach my friends that have that app from the one that I'm currently using. So that's an example of exactly the opposed sort of outcome, which is supposedly to increase contestability and to allow smaller firms to enter the market more easily.
Okay. Okay. Lazar, I don't know if you are going to use the presentation or not at the same time that you are presenting.
Yeah, well, I thought I was going to give the presentation and then you were going to make questions. So maybe I misunderstood the format.
Okay, so you want to use it now or how do you want to do it?
Well, the questions, I guess, are not all of them covered entirely in the presentation. My presentation lasts about 15 minutes. I don't know if we have time or we're just going to do the questions. The presentation was a separate thing.
Okay, so try to use the presentation and we will but as briefly as possible if you think that's a good idea before we will continue with some of the questions later on.
Okay, so do you want me to give the presentation from the beginning?
Yep.
Okay, how much time do we have? Because maybe this changes how fast I have to go.
We have around 50 minutes for each of you.
So I have 15 minutes from now for the presentation?
Take around 12 minutes and then we'll have
okay.
the last questions that we agreed.
Okay, perfect. All right, so thank you everybody for being here. Thank you, Jerónimo, for inviting me. What I'm going to discuss, I'm going to try and be brief, is one of the most important pieces of legislation coming out of the European Union, and one which is surely poised to overhaul how digital markets function or don't function in the Union. Now, as you might have already guessed from the title of my presentation and some of my answers, today I'd like to point out several ways in which that change might not necessarily be for the better. This, I'm sure, will contrast with some of the more positive assessments of the DMA you may have heard, but in any case, and whatever your view of the DMA coming in, I hope it'll at least give you something to think about on this topic. So a very basic reminder for those who may not have followed EU events so closely, such as those of us whose livelihood depends on it, like myself, the DMA is a piece of ex-ante regulation that aims to ensure quote unquote fairness and contestability. Sorry, let me change that. Yeah. In EU digital markets, sorry. It purports to do so through a series of obligations and prohibitions targeting so-called gatekeepers. These are companies providing core platform services such as search engines, social networking, or online intermediation services, amongst others, and which are deemed to have a strong and durable competitive advantage over rivals. These prohibitions include, for example, things like self-preferencing, leveraging, or using data generated by business users for the commercial benefit of the platform. In addition, they also include data sharing, interoperability that I mentioned, and data portability obligations vis-a-vis rivals or potential rivals. However, in my opinion, the DMA raises a string of issues which can be organized thematically in three interconnected categories: legal, economic, and normative. I've picked out 5 points to illustrate what I mean in an ascending level of abstraction, so to speak. So if we have time, I'll try to cover all of them. Should take me about 10 minutes. So the first problem, sorry, just a second. The first problem with the DMA that I see is that it reduces or altogether circumvents the limits on administrative action. Now, I realize that this is a desired feature of the law, but the upshot is that it creates an imbalance between the ease of enforcement on the one hand versus the difficulty of challenging the new regulatory regime on the other. So for instance, the DMA dispenses with the need for case-by-case analysis when establishing gatekeeper status. If the thresholds are fulfilled, there is a presumption that a company is a gatekeeper and that its mere existence poses a threat to contestability and fairness, as follows from Article 3.2. By contrast, under EU competition law, for instance, dominance needs to be ascertained individually for each undertaking and in each separate case. And heuristics such as market share, while relevant, are not dispositive of a company's ability to produce undesirable, in that case, anti-competitive effects. Note also that under the DMA, the burden of proof is reversed. Gatekeeper status follows from the thresholds, and then it is for the gatekeeper to show that due to exceptional circumstances, it does not in fact hold gatekeeper power. The burden for showing this, however, is high and is made explicit in the preamble. It negates any arguments that seek to redefine the relevant market or which invoke efficiencies. Next, once a company is deemed a gatekeeper, the so-called non-compliance decisions of the Commission are not subject to a finding of a specific effect, not even as relates to fairness and contestability. The Commission doesn't look at, say, how self-preferencing or the lack of interoperability have affected fairness or contestability. Its investigation goes so far as to ascertain whether the gatekeeper has done or hasn't done what the law mandates. So, in a sense, as EU competition law moves more and more towards rigorous effects-based analysis and economics evidence, we saw confirmation of this in the Qualcomm judgment, the court. The DMA moves exactly in the opposite direction. Ultimately, however, this is not a flaw of the DMA so much as a feature, as I said initially. The underlying idea or sentiment being that the administrative constraints imposed by competition law are precisely the problem, because they hinder the ability of the Commission to control incumbents in digital markets. Put differently, the DMA is specifically designed to be an ex-ante regulatory instrument that applies easily and across the board, and that isn't constrained by the same economic, legal, and administrative limits as those that exist in competition law. Now, this brings us to the second point. That is, that departs EU competition law principles and logic, and in doing so, in a sense, subverts the union's approach to competition. So let me explain what I mean. The departure is justified in the DMA by the fact that it pursues fundamentally different objectives from EU competition law, as indicated in the preamble, very explicitly. This is both true and not true, in a sense. On the one hand, the DMA clearly covers conduct that affects competition and which could, in theory, fall under the scope of EU competition law, such as self-preferencing and access to data. In fact, interestingly, there was a case by the Italian AGCM precisely on access to data under Article 102. Rather, the case was initiated yesterday. However, the difference is that the conduct which is automatically damned by the DMA is not necessarily prohibited by EU competition law, or at least not per se prohibited, meaning that evidence of anti-competitive conduct or effects needs to be produced before an infringement can be found. Take interoperability, for example. Under EU competition law, the Commission or an NCA would have to prove, first of all, the existence of a dominant position. Then they would likely have to prove that access to the platform or data is essential for competitors under the essential facilities doctrine of Article 102. All the while, the dominant undertaking could allege an objective justification for its conduct. Similar insights might apply, say, to self-preferencing or interoperability. There needs to be dominance, and then there need to be anti-competitive effects. The narrow objective of EU competition law and the high standard for enforcement mean that where the Commission or the NCAs, national competition authorities, just to be clear, have attempted to bring self-preferencing cases like in Google Shopping or the recent decision by the Italian AGCM against Amazon, and probably the decision against Google that was also brought by the Italian AGCM, as I mentioned, these decisions must be underpinned by robust economic evidence and theories of harm, which typically results in lengthy decisions of up to several hundred pages. Now, instead of through lengthy processes of litigation and piecemeal change, The DMA is an attempt to declare as per se prohibited a lot of conduct which the Commission would have to prove is harmful under EU competition law. So despite claiming to be a separate animal, the DMA covers much of the same behavior as Article 102. It just uses standards which have been contemplated in the past, but which have ultimately been displaced by the consumer welfare standard under EU competition law, such as fairness or the protection of competitors. These are the so-called different objectives of the DMA, which is why I say that, arguments that say that the DMA is fundamentally different from EU competition law have to be taken with a grain of salt. So in a sense, the DMA creates a parallel world, a sort of enforcer's utopia in which all those cases brought by the Commission or NCAs under Article 102 succeed by default. This is, however, a fundamental revision of the union's approach to competition, in my opinion, and possibly also markets more broadly. It substitutes the notion that enforcement is warranted where competition is restricted at the expense of the consumer for the notion that successful firms should share their advantages with competitors, even if it comes at the expense of the consumer. For instance, the prohibition to use non-public data generated by business users for the purpose of advertising, sure, results in better rents for those businesses or business users, but also simultaneously results in consumers or end users being subjected to less relevant ads. But you might be asking yourself why tried and tested EU competition law provisions are not good enough for digital markets. The assumption is that digital markets are fundamentally different and thus require a special, stricter regime. But these assumptions too are somewhat dubious. Now, okay. How are we on time, Jerónimo?
Yes, you still have some minutes to finish.
Okay, let me speed it up. Okay, so let me go to the third point, which are those questionable assumptions. I think the DMA has some questionable economic and factual assumptions that underpin it about issues that are far from settled. This is especially dangerous in fast and moving and dynamic digital markets as an animating factor of regulation. For instance, the DMA assumes that the advantages currently enjoyed by incumbents are unassailable. Such advantages are generally said to come from data economies of scale and network effects. But data gives marginally diminishing returns and is replicable and non-rivalrous. There is thus nothing stopping, say, Bing from replicating the data-driven benefits enjoyed by Google, except the quality and the popularity of its own service, the two things being related, including its ability to differentiate and not merely imitate its own product from Google's. The same applies to network effects. While they confer an advantage, that advantage is certainly not born of some irreplicable infrastructural investment. So it is questionable whether intervention is necessary to prompt people to use something which is already available to them, but which they choose not to use anyway. Indeed, companies come and go in digital markets all the time. Ask yourself, where are AOL, Netscape, Yahoo, MSN, MySpace, or Lycos today? Similarly, there are currently many search engines competing with Google, such as Bing, DuckDuckGo, Yandex, Swisscows, Startpage, Jibiru, or OneSearch. There are also many messaging services competing with WhatsApp, such as Viber, Telegram, WeChat, Signal, Snapchat, or Discord. I use some of those. Still, the DMA assumes a painstakingly static view. And despite its rhetoric, I think that it de facto treats certain markets as tipped irreversibly and seemingly gives up on the idea that the EU will produce the next Google, Amazon, Facebook, or Apple, or something similar. Instead, it focuses on extracting more rents in favorable terms for currently less successful companies, especially in downstream markets, at the expense of current incumbents. This is probably an industrial policy question, but the problem with this thinking is that it may well come at the expense of the ability of the EU to produce firms that compete upstream with the GAFA firms due to the high regulatory burdens and decreased incentives of doing so, quite simply. So indeed, why become the next Amazon if you can freeload on their investments in the marketplace to sell your products? Better to remain safely tucked into the downstream market than contest Amazon's upstream position. Fourth, as I've already hinted at, the DMA engages in complex product design decisions and reallocates rents across the supply chain from incumbents to business users. This is done in the pursuit of some alleged vision of fairness, but in a market economy, such decisions are better left to markets, not legislators or executive agencies, especially when there are legitimate disagreements over which type of product design is better for whom and for what purpose. For instance, the DMA attempts to make open and fully interoperable systems the norm. However, open and closed or semi-closed systems have both advantages and disadvantages that belie simplistic characterizations of one being inherently superior to the other. So open systems might provide for more choice and freedom, but are more prone to security risks, as I mentioned before in the questions. Alternatively, closed or semi-closed systems are typically more secure and offer a curated experience which many users value, especially in a world in which the selection of data and not merely raw data itself is of value to end users. Now, instead of respecting the preference of consumers and the ability of businesses to set their own business models, the DMA overrides such preferences with its own. In fact, many of the product design decisions that it makes seem guided purely by the goal of making life easier for competitors and not consumers. For instance, as a consumer, I've never wanted a choice screen. It adds an unnecessary step, and I'd much rather enjoy a simplified, accessible experience. If I want to use a different browser, I can typically download it. Similarly, since I also value curation, I do rely on platforms to present choices in a non-neutral manner, something which the DMA prohibits. To me, that is an added value and one of the main reasons for which I may pick one platform over the other. Now, the problem here is not only that the DMA guts the features some users like me like and imposes one size fits all that overrides the taste of some, but also that such product design decisions may produce unintended consequences that make certain products worse, as I mentioned. For instance, despite requiring that security not be compromised when ensuring interoperability, that's kind of like wanting to have your cake and eat it too. If you allow third-party stores and side loading on iPhones, there are almost certainly going to be increased security breaches. And my final point, all of the above, and especially the last point, raises normative questions about the role of the state in markets. So the DMA claims to speak for fairness, but that is a broad concept with multiple interpretations if I ever saw one. For some, like the drafters of the DMA, it is fair for current incumbents to share their competitive advantages with rivals, quite simply because companies should compete on quote unquote a level playing field. However, for others, it is fair for a company to enjoy the competitive advantages which it has acquired through legitimate means, such as, for instance, through superior management or product design decisions, which have resulted in increased voluntary transactions with other parties. Ultimately, and despite the many technical issues with the legislation that I pointed out, this is the core of the question for me. The DMA appears to signal a shift from a market economy to one in which the government and not businesses and users shapes markets and reallocates rents according to its preferred vision. I see this as a step in the direction of something altogether detached from the free market and more akin to state capitalism, in which the state shifts from being a guardian of a comparatively neutral legal framework to actively participating in the market by imposing teleological objectives and values on actors such as fairness or market product design decisions, and ultimately its preferred vision of what a market should look like or shouldn't look like. Now, to summarize, the DMA, in my opinion, imposes low administrative constraints on enforcement, attempts to circumvent and, in a sense, upend the EU's approach to competition, rests on questionable yet far-reaching assumptions about markets and competition, engages in complex product design decisions that shouldn't befit legislators or enforcers, and moves the EU away from free markets towards something else. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
As we all have seen, you are very, very critical with the DMA and the new regulatory move of the European Union in this era. I would like to ask you, before given also the possibility to comment to our other two speakers on your presentation, I would like to ask you two questions. The first one is, do you see positive elements, positive aspects in the DMA, or only negative impacts? And the second one is, how did you see the comparison with what is happening in the US?
Yeah, thank you for the questions. It reminds me of when Trump and Hillary were asked to say something nice about each other. I don't remember how they got out of that pickle. Okay, so let me start with the second question, which I guess is easier, and maybe you can kind of answer the first. So as far as the comparison with the US, a preliminary point to note is that the US legislative proposals have still not been voted. So unlike the DMA, it is uncertain whether or not there will be law. they will become law. In the case of ICOA, which is the American Innovation and Choice Online Act, one of, if not the most important bill, the bill should be put to vote in Congress soon, possibly even next week or the week after that. Structurally, the DMA is one piece of legislation. We can add the DSA to it if we talk about the package of digital regulation, whereas in the US, several bills exist or are currently under consideration. That's ICOA, as I mentioned, being the main one, let's say. Then we have the Access Act, we have the Open Apps Market Act, and maybe another one that I forget. Substantively, the legislation on both sides of the Atlantic covers more or less the same conduct by the same actors. One difference that I can name perhaps is that it seems to me that ICOA, for instance, seems to give more scope for affirmative defenses, especially by claiming security justifications for not allowing, for example, interoperability. Now, as to your first question, if I see something positive about the DMA, I think I will leave the audience sort of play devil's advocate and tell me what I've missed and what is so amazing about it. Right now, I'm not a fan of it for the reasons that I mentioned, but I'm open to hearing comments for sure.
Okay, thank you. I would like to give the possibility to Sandra and Miguel to comment and to give their impression about the what is happening in Europe as well.
Yep.
Well, first off, congrats, Lather, on your intervention in line with what you have already said. The question of how the DMA will eventually play out is at the very least very difficult prediction exercise, I would say, and so are its implications with competition law. But for sure, I gotta agree that it raises quite a great deal of doubt. Just look back when the whole debate was initiated. The DMA drafters insisted that the DMA protects different interests from those that competition law protects. So actually, I think that they do not differ that much from the interest that competition law protects, and included innovation or consumer welfare, for instance. I think that we will be right on the same track. And moreover, the DMA's scope of action or obligations are focused on practices that have already been subject, previous and ongoing cases dealt by competition. So, in a nutshell, the whole question of how it will play out and its interactions with competition law, it's quite difficult. I'm not neither against nor in favor. I guess that I need to wrap my head around it yet to take an informed stand on that. But
yeah, definitely. One risk, I mean, what you point out is that they don't seem to have different objectives. I think it's a bit of a mixed bag. I think that they cover similar conduct, and the fact that there have been so many probes into behavior covered by the DMA through competition law, including national competition law, including decisions such as, for example, Google Shopping, and such as the Italian decision by the AGCM last year on Amazon. Oh, hello?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Are you still here?
Yes.
You hear me? Oh, sorry. Yeah, because my screen went blank for a second. Yeah. So that indicates that while they cover the same sort of actions or the same behavior, at least to some extent, I think that the difference is kind of in the standard, because I think that some of the behavior that wouldn't be prohibited under EU competition law, such as, for example, yesterday there was a probe launched into Google for not allowing access to data under Article 102, which is abuse of dominance. So not allowing access to data could be an abuse of dominance under 102 if that data was considered essential to compete. The DMA also covers that refusal to grant access to data, but it dispenses with the need to show dominance and the other elements of an infringement under 102. So it covers the same conduct in that specific case. It just applies another standard and says, okay, this might be good for the consumer. This might not be bad for competition. This might be actually be pro-competitive, but we don't care because this act is about fairness. And fairness is about the people or the companies that currently enjoy a leg up, sharing that advantage with rivals. So my objective is not only, despite what you might think, criticize the DMA, is also to point out that, okay, but be aware that that can clash with long established competition law principles, and also that you then might be in a situation where you were sacrificing competition and consumer welfare for fairness and contestability, which is mostly going to benefit certain business users, some of which are not that small. And if that's your industrial policy decision, then so be it. But just be aware of the implications.
All right. Hi, Lazar.
Hi.
My question was, I had very similar questions to what you've already addressed. So I'm curious because if you in the reports that were published when the DMA was under discussion, one of the issues that was highlighted often, and this is something that we're really interested in China, was, you know, the problem of the length of proceedings, in the context of the digital economy as well, which normally requires a swift solution, and we're seeing, you know, these cases taking so long. You know, if we look now, for instance, more recently at the Intel saga, right, and you know, it's cases going on for more than a decade, or even decades in plural. Has this somehow been addressed directly or indirectly? I mean, you, for instance, just said that the data issue, the data issues that can be maybe targeted as an abuse, but also you don't need to show abuse of dominance, so it might be a bit easier to kind of attack what these companies do. But do you think that the DMA has an impact on this issue? I mean, as you know, this is also quite controversial because some don't see it as a problem. Some say, well, this is the price to pay for the rule of law, and that's also fine. But you know, I just wonder whether you have any perspective.
Definitely. It absolutely addresses that. I think that it is embedded in the ethos of the DMA to try to circumvent the administrative constraints and the evidentiary burdens that EU competition law has developed over the years, over the decades, including the consumer welfare standard. The reason why it's so difficult to bring a case is because you actually have to prove effects, you have to prove dominance, you have to define the relevant market, and so on. The DMA dispenses with that. And this is why I call it an enforcer's paradise or an enforcer's utopia. I don't know what I called it. Precisely because of that. It kind of circumvents it and says, we don't care about sort of your efficiencies and your relevant market definition. It's even said in the preamble that a gatekeeper or a presumed gatekeeper cannot dispute that that classification based on efficiency arguments or by redefining the relevant market. So it absolutely tries to circumvent competition law. And it goes to the previous question, which is that it covers much of the same behavior, just creates a standard that will mean that basically the house always wins. Sort of, if you've done or haven't done what the DMA says that you must do, there is no further proof necessary. Like the dawn raids that will be carried out purely to demonstrate whether you have or have not granted access to your data, not how it affects consumers and so on, not even business users. Those things are assumed. It's assumed that these things are harmful. And for me, the problem with that is that it gives way too much discretion to the commission. And the flip side of moving too fast is moving too fast and breaking things. I don't think that the Commission is in a position to understand these markets any better than the stakeholders and participate directly in them. And I think that the risk of stifling innovation and harming consumers is giant. And ultimately, it's also a normative or ethical question. What do you think the role of the state should be? Should the state engage in market shaping? Should it define outcomes? Should it redistribute rents across the supply chain? Or should these things be left more to businesses and their consumers? The outcomes are not always going to be fair, especially not according to somebody's idea of fairness, but free markets are not necessarily fair. They're free, or as free as possible. No market is completely free. But I don't know if that answers the question, but I think it's a very good one. And I absolutely think that that is the intent of the DMA.
Indeed, it answers my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. And we move to China and to Sandra Marco. You have as well a presentation.
I will answer. If you ask me questions, I can try to adopt.
Okay. Okay. So the first question was, how do the developments in China affect big techs compared to those in Europe in terms of both substance and procedure?
Could I don't know who I need to ask about whether the presentation can be shared on the screen. And then I guess I can move the slides with this.
Yep.
¿Me puedes en las diapositivas de
la presentación de PowerPoint?
Marco? Sí. Well, in the meantime, thank you so much. I just wanted to start by, of course, thanking Jerónimo for inviting me. It's very nice to come home. You might know that Jerónimo was my EU law and competition law professor. So he is to blame for my passion for this subject and for any mistakes I make. No, I'm just kidding. And it's also very nice to be with Lazar and Jerónimo. We share the EUI link, and with the people on this table also, Miguel, we share the link with this institution. So it's great to feel even more at home. So comparing the developments in China to the EU is always a little bit of a challenge. The context is very difficult. And what I would say, the first thing that I would say is that they might seemingly be more ad hoc developments and a bit of a knee-jerk reaction. I'll get to that later, knee-jerk reaction to what or why. But if we look, what I've tried to do in my recent research is take a step back and look at the overall picture and see what that tells us about, policy, enforcement trends, etc. And that's what I've tried to do. If you're interested, by the way, on this, in this topic, I published a paper with this title, The Incursion of Antitrust into China's Platform Economy, in the Antitrust Bulletin. Open access, you can just click on it. If you just use your preferred search engine, you can find it, no problem. So, went the wrong way. So I just wanted to maybe explain to you what has been happening in China so that then we can compare these developments to Europe. So the first thing is that we find, and this is quite similar to Europe, is that there have been big fines imposed for anti-competitive conduct. Perhaps the best known fine is that imposed on Alibaba last April, which was record-breaking fine, the highest ever fine imposed under the anti-monopoly law, which is the Chinese competition law. The second development is that there has been an enhancement of merger control in different ways. So there was a merger blocked, and also there have been a lot of fines for gun jumping. I will get to that in just a moment. Then there has been significant guidance issued, which has a certain DMA flavor to it, but it's guidance as opposed to legislation. And then there have been changes announced to the basic competition law. Now, the final thing that I wanted to mention is that actually there's also an institutional reform going on, a general expansion of the institutions, plus a new a relatively new institutional framework or more like a rearrangement of the institutional framework. Let me just very quickly cover these issues. So effectively, for the first issue was fines that I was mentioning. So if you look at the AML, the competition law, it prohibits the abuse of a dominant position, very much like Article 102 of the TFEU. And what we are finding is that the focus of the cases that there have been in China in the last year have been practices that would be considered pretty much inherently harmful in Europe. So in that sense, there is a clear similarity. So effectively, the cases like the Alibaba case focuses on exclusive dealing and what has been called in China a choose one from two practice, which is effectively when if somebody is using a platform, a business uses a platform for its business, and then it is forced to only use that platform and not go to the competition. And if we're thinking that these platforms have the locking effects that we know, and the network effect, the network effects that we know, this kind of exacerbates the locking effects of platforms as well. So this has been addressed for quite some time, but it was originally addressed in private litigation. And it has gone all the way up to the Supreme People's Court. And it's very interesting because the case that the Supreme People's Court had to deal with was pretty much a commercial war between Qihu and Tencent. And you might know that Tencent makes a very popular messaging app called QQ. It's very, very popular in China. And the problem was that, both companies at some point started making software, antivirus software for the phones. And I think when Tencent entered the market and started making software, Qihu said, well, Tencent is not really protecting your data adequately. They're misusing your data. This was quite a serious accusation. And Tencent filed a lawsuit and won. But in response to Qihu's accusations, Tencent made its QQ app incompatible with Qihu's software. So basically, again, a bit choose one from two. So if you want to use my messaging app that effectively you need because everybody is on this app, then you need to use my software and not Qihu's software. It was only implemented for a day. So you have to put it in the context of this war that both companies had been quite nasty to each other. And also it was very, very shortly implemented, but already Qihu lost like 10% of its customer base. Now, when this got to the Supreme Court analyzed this and thought, well, this is, put it in the context of this war between the companies. And because it had been implemented for such a short time, it thought, well, it didn't really have huge effects. Look, mainly, it treated it mainly as an effects issue and found in favor of Qihu. Now, we had similar cases, but with some problems. A case against VipShop for similar practices, but VipShop was not really dominant. So there was a smaller fine imposed under the anti-unfair competition law, which does not require finding of dominance. But then, of course, we got to the big cases. And at the end of 2020, an investigation was announced into Alibaba. And Alibaba effectively punished traders that used competing platforms. So this was a clear choose one from two strategy, forced exclusive dealing. And there was a record fine of almost 2.5 billion euros. The market shares of Alibaba were clearly quite high. There is the relevant market definition exercise similar to that conducted in Europe. So the principles that the decision is based on are similar to those that we have found in similar decisions in Europe, and as is the way of finding the dominance, etc. Shortly thereafter, a few months thereafter, Meituan, which is a food delivery app, was also fined over 530 million US, again, for pressuring its merchants to sign exclusive cooperation agreements. And again, this was in a highly concentrated market. So another significant fine imposed. So the logic is not dissimilar to that in Europe. The focus has been on practices that are also in Europe almost unquestionably harmful. Now, one interesting thing is that these fines are not going to be appealed. We know because the companies have already issued a mea culpa. Yes, we did wrong. We accept it. We will comply, and that's it. So if you compare to what's happened in Europe with the Google cases, etc., there is that are under appeal, then this is, of course, a significant practical difference. In merger control, lots and lots of fines for gun jumping. Let me just show you here. So 90 fines in 2021 for gun jumping. Now, the maximum allowed is about 80,000 US, so it's quite low, much lower than that under European law. Now, if we compare, for instance, to the Altis case and what's been happening in Europe, again, there has also been a significant focus on gun jumping. But what we find is that these are sometimes, quite small transactions, sometimes that go back almost a decade. And if you look at the names of the companies being fined, there tend to be, Tencent and all the big tech, the China's big tech companies. The only of these transactions, only one had anti-competitive effects. And that was the Tencent China Music Group. And in addition to the fine, there were some remedies imposed on the companies. But also there was one merger blocked between two video game streaming platforms. And this is only the third merger ever to be blocked under the AML. In Europe, I believe right now 31 mergers have been blocked. The last one being the Korean shipbuilding merger. But of course, the Chinese competition law has a much shorter history, so that kind of makes sense. So these were, by the way, two Tencent associated companies, and through the merger, Tencent would become effectively the sole owner of the two companies. And the remedies offered were inadequate, and there was significant market foreclosure as a consequence of the merger. So then the other main development is, as I said, the policy. So first of all, in these decisions imposing fines on Alibaba and Meituan, in addition to the fine, there are obligations imposed on the companies. And those obligations sometimes go beyond restoring competition in the market. So for instance, Meituan is told to improve its labor conditions. And in this merger that had anti-competitive effects that had not been notified, there was an obligation imposed on the parties to notify all their mergers, even if they were below the threshold of the AML. So these remedies don't really restore competition in the market, and they don't really address the problems, and yet they have been imposed. So there are questions as to whether or not this may be indeed an excess of agency discretion. We have also seen the adoption of guidelines, and this is what I would maybe compare a bit to the DMA. Well, the first set of guidelines is simply the platform economy guidelines. They're quite lengthy, and they simply explain, how when there will be abuses of dominance through algorithms and other digital means. They also explain basically for every aspect of competition law, for cartels, when there might be collusion through algorithms. So they just explain how the traditional competition law rules and principles apply in the context of the digital economy. And then there are some super platform guidelines that were announced at the end of last year. The draft was announced at the end of last year. And this is where I find a bit similar to the DMA. There is some obligations imposed on what I would call super platforms, which have at least 500 million users and are active in 2 markets and other requirements. And they have to comply with a series of requirements, data protection. Some of the obligations are even higher than those imposed in the DMA. But these are just guidelines. Of course, the only thing is we have to put that in the context that we barely have any appeals of administrative decisions, for instance. So therefore, they have significant weight. Also, they were adopted, they were just announced almost overnight. They were adopted in a couple of months. And as we know, the DMA took 2 years. So of course, the procedure is different. Even though the outcome might be relatively similar, and the force of these guidelines cannot be underestimated. And then the final step that I would mention is that this has led to some changes in the actual competition law, mainly some direct references to the platform economy, a new abuse referring to the use of data and algorithms and other techniques used by platforms. And then, since we're in the area of gun jumping, and we have seen that gun jumping has been such an important focus, the fines have been really increased. Now they will be of up to 10%, 10 times higher, of 5 million, and even up to 10% of the turnover of the companies if there is anti-competitive effects of the unnotified merger. So you can see that we see that even in the law reform, there is an approximation, perhaps, to the European position. The principles are there, but of course, the Chinese system is different, and the way that they have been implemented, I would say, has been, within the parameters of the Chinese system. I think that would.
Do you think that all these developments, Sandra, they are general or they are big tech specific?
Yeah, so what we have, that maybe brings me back to maybe the context of what's going on. You hear a lot about China's big tech clampdown or crackdown. So there is a lot of attention in the media as to why this is happening and if this is happening. So I would say the first thing that we need to notice is that competition enforcement has been generally invigorated, for sure. So it's not just a digital thing. We are seeing cases in pharma industry and other industries, which are also quite commonly targeted in other jurisdictions. But there is, of course, if we look at the last year, the number of cases that have targeted China's big tech companies is really, really significant. That there's no denying that. Now, this brings me to one of the main focuses, the media attention. Why now? Why is China doing this? Why is China attacking its own big tech companies? This has been really the main focus in the press, and whenever they call you to talk about this, that's what they want to know. And it's very complex, right? Because I would say, well, the first thing I would say is, why not? I mean, the whole world seems to be coming to terms with the challenges of big tech, rightly or wrongly. And the idea that, yes, these companies are, we need them nowadays for so many things, but, they are also very powerful. And there is, like it has happened in many other sectors, there are some things that, if they behave in a certain way, can really have very detrimental effects. So, of course, as I say, well, it could be said that China is, on the one hand, jumping on the big tech bandwagon, right? On the other hand, there is also, although there is a feeling that this has happened overnight, there was some progress. So I remember reading even an article by Adrian M, who also is a former alumni from here, and he was saying already years ago, there is an increasing intention to target big tech issues, and so there was always some concern, at least, about this. But we saw that at the end of 2020, suddenly things really were unleashed and really accelerated. And one of the things it has been linked to was in the Bund Summit in 2020, the founder of Alibaba, Jack Ma, gave a speech, a very controversial speech. You can find a translation of the speech on LinkedIn, and if you go online, you'll find about the watershed moment for big tech. He really was very critical of a lot of the Chinese regulations and the bank's pawn shop mentality, for instance. And it was almost like a switch was hit, and then this happened shortly after Ant's IPO was going to happen, and the investigation, not an antitrust investigation, but by the other authorities in China, kind of messed that up completely. And then, the troubles for Alibaba started, etc. It may be a coincidence, of course. It might not be directly linked, but certainly there is that happened. And there was also another signal issued at the end of 2020, which was a general announcement by the Communist Party that there would be a focus on targeting the disorderly expansion of capital. And that would be done in part through antitrust. Now, the only thing that I would add to this, so it goes beyond, certainly beyond big tech, the expansion of antitrust. And I also said earlier that the institutions' resources have been expanded. So it's natural that they will be more antitrust cases being looked at. But also there are many developments beyond antitrust that are also affecting big tech. So there is a lot of data privacy issues being targeted by the relevant agencies, and also issues relating to the financial sector, which are being targeted also by the relevant authorities. So just to give the full idea that there is like a lot of things happening with regard to big tech, and they exceed the realms of antitrust. But in antitrust, there is also many developments happening in other sectors.
What do you think we can expect in the future?
Well, this is also another big thing, right? And there was actually an announcement a few months back that the local press in Hong Kong was very interested in, because China suddenly seemed to say to its regulators and to its enforcement authorities, maybe step back a bit, take it easy. So is this going to continue? Can we expect the same level of enforcement activity? Well, I think the important thing is to realize that what has happened to date has already left a big imprint in competition law and policy, right? This year, we've already seen, as I said, well, the guidelines are there to stay, and then also the legal reform that we have seen, and the institutional reform. So there's already something there that is at least, if not permanent, is there to stay for quite some time. Will we continue to see the levels of enforcement that we have been witnessing? Well, probably not. Mainly also because this is also a natural trend in competition law and policy. I remember when I was studying leniency for my previous research, that we see that normally success of leniency is suggested by first an increase of leniency applications, but then a drop, because then it means that there are hopefully fewer cartels, right? So the idea is, now that the companies are aware that they actually might be targeted, it seems that big tech companies in China really thought they were just exempt from everything, and they were just sometimes acting in ways that were clearly anti-competitive. Now that a clear signal has been sent out, you are not immune, we will definitely target this kind of conduct. It is likely that the companies will be a lot more aware and hopefully might engage in less anti-competitive conduct. So there should be a downward trend, hopefully a downward trend anyway. So I don't think that, what happened in 2021, I think is quite unique. But I would expect that we will still see some cases, especially, I would say the only problem is, so far, we have seen quite blatantly anti-competitive conduct struck down. I don't know if we are going to see cases that are more like effects-based. Let's see what happens, because that may be more complex, and that will tell us more about the policy and whether it's different from what we are seeing here. But that's overall what I feel that the trend will be.
Thank you very much. Very, very, very interesting. I don't know, Lazar, Miguel, if you want to comment anything about this.
Well, I can make a question, if I may. So we talked a bit in my presentation about the EU and the DMA and so on. So what do you think? Sort of, can you compare briefly in terms of procedure and substance the developments in China in terms of big tech companies to the ones in Europe? Are some of the concerns that I raised or the criticisms that I pointed out, would they be valid in China? Sort of, what's your take?
Okay, so let me just very quickly sum up the conclusions of my paper, the issues that I raised. So I think that certainly, when I was looking at the developments in China, one thing that came to my mind, that's why I was also asking you, was how all these criticisms that we have seen in Europe about the lengthy proceedings, etc., were suddenly resolved in China, right? Things have been happening very fast, and partly because there are no appeals, or again, let me be very careful, and I explain this a bit more carefully in the paper. It might be normal that there were not so many appeals. We cannot simply say that this is a problem of the system or anything, because we are now seeing invigorated enforcement. We are now seeing the big companies targeted, and therefore it is more likely that normally that happens, right, with companies that are relatively powerful, that they can, litigate in the courts. We may well now see an increase in litigation. In fact, there has been one case, one fine that was imposed against some pharmaceutical companies that has been appealed. I don't think we have the outcome yet, but I haven't. Maybe I've missed it because it takes me a while to make sure to keep an eye on all the latest developments. Suddenly we had that issue in China. That issue is not an issue, but it's also a bit problematic, a bit scary that things can happen so quickly. This mea culpa that I was saying earlier, issued by the companies that they are not going to take any action, might simply be because they are aware that the behavior that they've been engaging in is very unlikely to be excused in any way. There was very little discussion about objective justification of the conduct, by the way, in the decisions, even though objective justification is mentioned in the guidelines very, very frequently for most kinds of abuses. So I was a bit concerned about, about that contrast that we have, right? I mean, maybe neither situation is ideal, but it just makes you wonder. And one of the things I was saying is, well, maybe the creation of specialized tribunals, this is something that China has done in other areas, to deal with, first of all, maybe the difficulties in applying competition law for maybe a judiciary that has not, this is a new law, right, of only a bit more than a decade, to deal with that, right, so that if there is something that is normally anti-competitive, inherently harmful, then they can treat it as inherently harmful regardless of the circumstances, or also to maybe to make appeals a little bit more palatable, a little bit easier. But again, it's a big question mark, but it has happened in other areas. The other issue is that some of these, especially the administrative decisions linked to the fines imposed on Alibaba, etc., go a bit beyond, right? They don't address the competition problems, and it would be nice. I mean, there are clearly some problems in those markets, and it would have been maybe a good opportunity to target those problems, because otherwise the players in the markets are still going to have to face big obstacles. And instead, we are finding these other unrelated remedies or impositions on the companies. So that's somewhat a bit strange. So I don't think that necessarily the developments can be so different. I thought that perhaps more focus on restorative remedies could be another good thing that to do in China. But yeah, with a lot of question marks so far.
Thank you very much, Sandra. We've seen the evolution in Europe. We've seen the evolution in China, and we are going to introduce a third element, which is global governance. So, Miguel, which risks do you consider are associated with the lack of a sound global governance framework for competition law, and which solutions are there?
Okay, definitely we are witnessing a large number of extraterritoriality issues and multi-jurisdictional problems arising from the spread of cross-border operations. So while markets are increasingly going global, rules governing competition mostly remain like national in scope. So just picture, for instance, like the classic price fixing cartel, let's say between American firms and but it turns out that these American firms do not just operate in US soil, but also in that of the EU, or maybe they don't operate in EU land, but somehow their activities have an impact on EU's internal market. So anyhow, in many of these cases, we will be facing like a single conduct with an impact to different jurisdictions. Or think of a merger between companies operating in a plurality of countries whose merger control thresholds are met in such a way that the parties to that merger are forced to file before the competition authority of each and every one of these jurisdictions. So linking all this to Professor Maillo's question, all these possible scenarios give cause for inefficiencies in terms of time management, resource allocation, market performance. And if there is no cooperation at all between jurisdictions, then there are greater chances of overlooking cases worth looking into. Also, there may be like difficulties for the reviewing authority to collect the necessary evidence when the facts didn't take place in its territory. For sure, possibilities to enforce sanctions in other territories are quite scant or weak, and not to mention the possibility for the parties to come across divergent outcomes on the same issue. So where do all these inefficiencies lead? They clearly lead to legal uncertainty in international markets. So the question was about risks and solutions. So which options are up for grabs in order to address these lack of a global governance framework of competition policy? Some voices, authors, practitioners argue in favor of the establishment of a common international enforcement authority. I see this like a little bit too ambitious, maybe unrealistic too. Maybe if we take the example, the paramount example of the EU, I think that it wouldn't work if we apply that example to the international arena, because we cannot forget that EU competition policy takes place at the core of the most committed regional integration process, and all within the bigger framework of the most ambitious political integration project, at least, and I mean this in a good sense. So I guess that many of you will think like me in the sense that taking the European Union example to the international arena seems a little bit over the top, especially if we take into account that if ever it's established an international enforcement authority, it will very likely go hand in hand with a set of mandatory rules, binding rules. So in essence, it would be like an international antitrust code, if you want to put it that way. So I'm more of the view or more in favor of a more flexible approach to global governance of competition policy, in the sense that I will, instead of conferring the powers on a common international enforcement authority, I think it's more practical if we rely on guidelines, recommendations, best practices, in essence, non-binding instruments. And although there is room for improvement, because this is what we actually are doing somehow nowadays with all the work of the International Competition Network, the ICN and the OECD, definitely they are making inroads towards a healthy understanding of competition law by delivering a handful of very insightful documents covering almost every aspect of competition law. So to me, the key is that the key to achieving sound sound competition principles on a worldwide level.
So what do you think is the role of possible multilateral cooperation and also bilateral cooperation? If I may, you can join this with the possibility or the evolution of cooperation between EU and China precisely in the competition field.
Yeah, for sure. I feel that when it comes to soft ways of cooperation and competition policy issues, hands down, bilateral and multilateral agreements can really do the trick to cope with these jurisdictional issues that we were commenting on and extraterritoriality issues. Plus, these agreements also deliver other type of advantages, as they can easily include anti-dumping provisions that they may help counter predatory pricing and other type of behaviors. So yeah, and historically speaking, if we looking back on time, historically speaking, history speaks for itself, because we can observe a large number of these bilateral and multilateral agreements successfully concluded with competition policy provisions, maybe not just a provision, maybe a whole chapter laid down in, to be found in the wording. So we can claim that without these agreements, the countries' trading blocs will be somehow hampering themselves, their own internal markets, because without this type of agreements, there would be quite obviously an under-enforcement of anti-competitive behavior. And in this regard, I think it's also worth mentioning that it's way easier to come to terms on competition policy issues and cooperation whenever jurisdictions find like some common grounds between them or share economic interests. So this fact takes place especially amongst jurisdictions that belong to the same region. Now, the fact of being geographically close to one another somehow facilitates a more feasible form of harmonization. And I think that we can see this in the Caribbean community, in the CARICOM, Caribbean community, the Association of Southeast Asia, not to mention the case of the EU in the international arena, whenever the not whenever, but when the European Union concludes free trade agreements, you can frequently observe that those provisions on competition law to seek soft convergence. And China is, I think, it's getting good at this too. Actually, China also relies on free trade agreements, soft convergence mechanisms, not in every single free trade agreement, but if I remember rightly, I think they have already like over 20 free trade agreements in force. I don't know if all of them have this type of provisions, but there's one that it's quite well known, which is the free trade agreement between China and Australia, which sets out how the respective competition authorities should collaborate and work together in order to exchange information, provide technical assistance for notification purposes, enforcement, share viewpoints in the cases that are subject to review by both parties, And whenever this the multilateral agreements discussion comes up, I always like to bring up the whole thing surrounding mutual recognition provisions. I think that a whole different scenario arises when a mutual recognition clause is found within one of these free trade agreements. What's a mutual recognition clause? A mutual recognition clause is a provision that basically compels an authority to apply domestically a decision that has been delivered by the enforcer from a third country. So a free trade agreement with free trade agreement with this type of clauses, with a mutual recognition clause, is not as soft as a free trade agreement without it. Okay, it's like, I like it to put it that way, but maybe some might disagree. It's like a hard harmonizing or hard harmonization feature within a soft harmonization instrument, okay, to say somehow. And also the whole mutual recognition clauses, dilemma, also bring about a bunch of difficulties. Difficulties for whom? The reviewing authority, the evaluating authority, obviously has like this bigger burden on it, uncertainty for the recipient jurisdiction, because maybe the evaluating jurisdiction has not taken into account all these special circumstances from the other jurisdiction. Not to mention a possible refusal from the authorities to accept the decision coming from a different jurisdiction. And taking this to the private sector, individuals, market players maybe are a little bit wary of having their information going from one country to another, from the officials of one competition authority in the hands of another, because maybe they feel too exposed. So all these difficulties suggest that mutual recognition clauses could be accepted as, or it would be better to accept them as prima facie evidence, just somehow like the European Union's damages directive lays out for the European Union, where national final infringement decisions are irrefutably binding for the damages court, but those decisions coming from a third member state are just prima facie evidence of the infringement.
We have also the International Competition Network. Which role do you think that this International Competition Network may play in this global governance of competition law, and what is the role of the EU within that International Competition Network? Maybe Sandra, then we will comment, because what we see when we were doing the paper is that China has not yet entered into the International Competition Network, and I don't know if you know any reason for that, or how do you see this fact that China is limiting its cooperation there at more bilateral cooperation with the US and with the EU, but it has not decided yet to step in this International Competition Network. And if you see that this might change in the future because maybe more resources, or so, what do you think, both of you?
I will let you go first.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely interesting. I mean, Hong Kong, the Hong Kong Competition Authority is definitely involved. So I was actually, they appointed me a non-governmental advisor back in 2015. So they've been involved from the very beginning that the competition law has been enforced. Mainland Chinese authorities are not. So it's interesting because, well, I guess that on the one hand, Chinese competition law and policy has developed, in line often with international principles, but we always say with this expression, with Chinese characteristics. But there is definitely no reluctance to looking at the solutions that have been proposed elsewhere, and applying them or adopting them, or even adapting them, I would say, to the Chinese context. And indeed, China is very prone to cooperation, to bilateral cooperation. I have been since 2017 teaching a course on EU competition law to Chinese officials that come to Bruges, and well, now it's online. We cannot do it in person anymore. But definitely there is that interest in the developments that are happening elsewhere. It's hard to see why they have not joined yet, but I wouldn't completely discard it in the future. I mean, I can only speculate, and it's a little bit difficult to speculate the reasons. But yeah, but they're definitely involved in discussions in the international arena. And I think indeed it's kind of a pity because a lot of the times, especially in China, that has now really established its competition authorities are certainly an enforcer to take into account for competition for companies all over the world, and many of whom have a presence in China. And it's definitely an advantage if China is part of the discussions that are happening in the context of the ICN, the working groups, etc., because there is really a lot of common ground found and established. So indeed, I would hope that maybe in the future this will change.
I think it will contribute certainly to de facto convergence in certain issues. It will facilitate that work. And when I put that questions to some Chinese colleagues, they told me maybe it's a question of resources, of human resources. They still, the authority was not very didn't have sufficient people to then enter and really actively contribute. So they prefer to step back yet and wait for a better entry in the future. I don't know. We are speculating, but definitely I think the entry of China in the ICN will have an effect and an impact, and probably not only in China but also in other places, because China will represent in a way. I don't know if you agree. Certain trends or certain positions of also developing countries, developing economies to a certain extent. I don't know if you think that's the case or.
Absolutely. I think also there is a lot to, well, I don't know whether to say to learn, but certainly the experience of effectively ensuring antitrust enforcement with the vigor that mainland China has achieved is certainly worth of praise. And indeed, for so many newcomers into the antitrust arena, it's worth exploring, and for China to share these experiences with other jurisdictions, I think would be quite enriching. I think that, like as I was saying, now there has been a lot of resources poured into the competition authorities. There is now a part of what was the SAMR, which was the competition authority until now, which is a bit like DG Comp. I mean, please, it's very, very broad. Don't quote me on this, but in the sense that it does a lot of other things. And now the specific part dealing with competition law has kind of become kind of independent, it seems. So there is reason to believe that there is enough people power, etc., to really make a significant contribution. And I have to say, I have learned so much, as I was saying, in Bruges, in these summers that I have had the chance to interact with the Chinese officials. Really, really interesting discussions and very, very informative about what's going on and why they follow certain principles, etc. So certainly, I think this will be great for the ICN and for the mutual learning process. Yeah.
Final comment, Miguel. Do you want to add anything about this?
I would just add that I would agree with you. I don't know either the reasons on account of which China decided not to get into the ICN, but probably now that they are not within the OECD, but they are somehow also collaborating, and so probably in the future, maybe I don't know, but it's difficult to. It's a known territory, difficult to predict. I said that Russia wasn't going to invade Ukraine, and I was totally wrong. So I cannot venture to say if China is getting into the ICN.
Lazar, do you want to make any comment on all this before we end?
No, I'm okay. Thank you.
Any questions from the audience? Very brief ones. We have run out of time, so I just join me, please, congratulating all the speakers for this great session. And we move forward immediately to the closing session. Very brief one, okay? So I invite Roberto Helado to come for this closing session. Okay, so let me just thanks again every one of you for this participation, for coming here. Let me also thank all the partners of the network. University College London, Université Catholique de Louvain. There's no one from the European University Institute that is associated to the network, but we will be for 2 weeks there next week and the following one. Also the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, who has been very active, as you have seen during the sessions, and other universities. We have participation of Sichuan, we have participation of Shanghai, we have participation of many colleagues, also from other European universities. So we are very happy of all this participation and looking forward to new meetings. The first one for sure is the summer course and the summer workshop on EU and China relations concerning global climate change. We will take place at Florence at the European University Institute in the next 2 weeks. Of course, you are all invited to participate. We will be doing this again in a hybrid format. So it's perfectly possible to register and participate online. We will be tackling energy, we will be tackling transports, cities, we will be tackling again competition policy and sustainability. We will be tackling new resources, how to fund climate change, and we will be looking at the Chinese experience and the European experience and trying to see and to understand how we can cooperate further on climate change and how we can all together contribute to the fight against climate change. So we will be delighted to have you in all sessions or in some of the sessions. And we have a wonderful new year because there's still one more year of the network. We'll be having a lot of events. We will have international conference in Shanghai. Next year we will have several public aware meetings to present the results in Beijing and in Brussels. We were planning other activities plus the publications and the book that will also complete the package of this network. So thank you very much, and thanks as well to Roberto Gelato, adjunct to the Vice Rector for International Relations, who has been so gentle to participate in this closing session. I give you the floor, Roberto, for these last words and to close formally the international conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Well, on behalf of the rector of our university, Rosa Viciedo, and the vice rector for internationalization, Ainhoa Uribe, who have not been able to be here today, I would like to thank you. I'm really happy to be here in this closing session, magnificent international Congress that's been running for the last couple of days at CEU San Pablo University here in Madrid. I would like to acknowledge first the impressive role that the Royal Institute, University Institute for European Studies is having in CEU's commitment for internationalization. This is not an overstatement, this is not just big words. I would like to specifically appreciate the work of the director of the Institute, José M, Beneyto, and my co-host today and PI of the research project that has gathered you for these last couple of days and other endeavors. Internationalization is a driving force for this university. And it's not just that, it's some of the foundational values this institution. When a century and something ago, our founder was entrusted with the mission of founding a Christian Catholic newspaper. One of the first moves that he made was to open up to the world and see how good journalism was done elsewhere. And we see it from that initial funding spirit with initiatives like this one, trying to hear specialists from all over the world to learn from you and to become better. For us, internationalization is just not speaking other languages, but also learning from other cultures, as you've been doing for the last couple of days. In my 10 years here at CEU, I've seen this at so many different levels that I'm just humbled and honored to witness the closing of this Congress. And I hope that you have more initiatives in the future, as Professor Maillo has pointed out at the end of his speech. This conference and many international initiatives would not be possible without the funding support of institutions like the European Commission through the Erasmus Plus program that has co-funded this conference and the project. But it's definitely not possible without the partners. And here is where I would like to give my final acknowledgement, last but not least, to all of you who've made this possible. The initiatives are all very well, but we need partners to implement them, to put them in motion. So I just took a gaze to the list, to the impressive list of supporting institutions. I would like to give special thanks to the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, Fudan University, the University College London, and the Université Catholique de Louvain. We will be forever grateful to you for supporting this Congress, this conference. During these days, we've heard and you've learned from the directors of this conference, whom I mentioned before, José M Beneyto and Jerónimo Maillo, Carmen Cano from the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Feng Hongping and Zhang Min from the Institute of European Studies, Richard McMahon from the University College London, Zhang Yingyong from the Shanghai Institute for International Studies, Alexander Spezlicchini from the University of Macau, Elena Maseglia, Fabrizio Pascucci, Eduardo Traversa, and Yulin Zhao from the Université Catholique de Louvain, Sandra Marco from the Chinese University of Hong Kong, Lazar Rajic from the International Center of Law for Law and Economics, José Manuel Muñoz from Nebrija University, Carlos Uriarte from Rey Juan Carlos University, and of course, my colleagues here at CEU, Javier Porras, Marta Villar, Antonio Alonso, Loreto Machez, Miguel Verdeguer, and Alan Tatum from CEU San Pablo, and also Enrique Puerta from CEU Fernando III University. I took some little time to acknowledge you personally because I think it's the people, it's the persons who made this possible. And sometimes when we talk of partners, they seem like very big institutions, but people make institutions, and you've made this possible. So once again, I would like to thank you for your time, your passion, and your interest these 2 days. And here's to more conferences like this. Thank you very much.